Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. So, in my comments the other day, I got a question that I get every once in a while, and it basically said, do you ever just talk about comic stories and stop talking about politics? And I get that question a lot because a lot of people mistake my channel for a comics channel, which it isn't. My channel is centered around the concept of hero. It has been from the very beginning. When I started the channel and I wrote the little introduction that's on that obscure little page that's part of your channel, that's what I said. It's about the concept of hero. Now, I talk about comics a lot because the idea of a superhero really is the easiest way to see what's going on with the idea of hero today. Because, as I always say, there's a very strict divide between power on the one hand, which is the super, and hero on the other. And the traditional idea of hero focuses on the hero, whereas your progressive culture, quote unquote progressivism, focuses on the power and corrupts the idea of hero. And this is why I talk about politics so much. It's because this is the corrupting factor of the idea of hero today. And I quite simply cannot thoroughly talk about the concept of hero without going into the political today. That's like saying, I'm going to cover national politics, but I'm never going to speak about the president. It just doesn't work. But having said all that, today I'm going to talk a lot about comic stories and the future of the comic industry itself. Although this might be a little bit of a rambling video compared to most of my other ones, although I'm sure many people think all of my videos are rambling. So I just want to look at a couple of things that happened over the last couple of weeks. The first one being the recasting of Batwoman on the CW show so that a, as they put it, woman of color is now playing this character of Batwoman. Now, when I saw this, really, all I did was yawn. I don't care. And really, I think that's what collectively everybody is doing. They're just yawning and saying, I don't care. Now, a lot of people ridiculed this show because it deserves to be ridiculed, but honestly, I don't care. I had thought originally that I really didn't care about it, to the extent that I didn't even click on any of these videos or read any of the articles. I just read the headline and went, Again, because I thought, I don't care about this character. Because I sort of noped out of comics in the late 1990s because I could see the writing on the wall with progressivism taking over everything, and I just started to buy old back issues of things or collections or stuff like that. It wasn't until the last couple of years where I started to get back into current comics. And why? Well, because on YouTube I can figure out which comics are actually worth my money and therefore go buy those ones. So I'm not wasting any of my money at all. But the point is that this character of Batwoman was never actually in any of the storylines that I care about. In my mind, she's not actually part of the Batman canon family. Now, she might be now, but I really don't own any runs of comics where she's there. So I don't care about this character. And all I've ever seen about this character is that she's a progressive dumpster fire. So if they want to turn up the heat on the progressive dumpster fire, they can go right ahead. So that was my thought process when I saw all of that going on. But then over this last week, I read X-Force number 10, and I did a 10-second comic review on it, which I do on the community section of this page. And for my personal notes, I started out by saying, I hate this comic. And really, I do hate this comic. But I hate it and despise it in a way that's more the logical definition of hatred. It's really not a feeling of hatred. It's, as Augustine would put it, it's a willful aversion to it. It's like, why would I go near that? And to talk about my point, I'll describe for you very briefly why this story is just so bad. First of all, in the second panel of the entire book, you have progressive speak. Because you have Domino talking to Wolverine saying, don't police my speech. Now, someone pointed out to me, that's really not progressive speak. But honestly, if it wasn't before, it certainly is now, because they've taken over this phrase. Because if you say this phrase now, this is one of their so-called dog whistles that they use to attack people. If you do anything to police others' speech, you're a bigot. If you do it to someone who is a person of color, then you're a racist. All these kinds of things. So yes, it's being used today, weaponized by your progressive crowd in order to attack people. Then within the story itself, you have Kid Omega, and something weird happened to him in the middle of the story, and I really couldn't figure out what was going on until the end of the story, because he sort of disappeared, as if he turned into a pile of compost, which was what happened within the story. And it wasn't until the end of the story that I realized, okay, so he did turn into a pile of compost, so he got killed. And it was no fanfare, he just died on a side panel, and no great fuss was made about it. And then it clicked in. Oh, right. These characters can be resurrected at the drop of a hat, so death means nothing. And if death means nothing, then the story and the stakes mean nothing. But then you had the final scene of this book, where you have Wolverine in a hot springs, and Jean Grey comes into the hot springs. And if anyone was wondering whether or not it's actually true that Jean Grey is sleeping with both Wolverine and Cyclops at the same time, and there's probably something going on between Cyclops and Wolverine as well, I think this scene pretty much confirms that, because Jean Grey gets much too close to Wolverine in this scene. This is not a friendly getting close to each other. This is I'm sleeping with you getting close to each other. So there's that, and then there's the sort of throwaway line where Jean Grey is saying she doesn't want to be a part of X-Force anymore. They put her on there as their so-called moral compass, although this current character has zero to do with morality, I'll tell you that. But she says, I don't want to be a part of that anymore. Maybe you can go get Colossus. He has a big heart. And then Wolverine responds with the following line. He's got a big everything. Now, some people may think I'm just reading into this comic, but I would say this line confirms not only that we have a three-way going between Wolverine and Jean Grey and Scott Summers, but also let's just throw Colossus into the mix as well. And why do I say that? Because the writer of this comic, when he was promoting people to go out and buy this comic, how did he sell it? He said, it's violence and sexuality. That's all that he bases the entire thing around. And this is the scene where sexuality is on display. And of course, these quote-unquote progressive people, how do they use sexuality? Well, they use it as a weapon. It's not viewed by them as traditionally it is viewed. It is simply a weapon to use against people in order to promote their progressive agenda. And so this is not a throwaway line by any means. He is deliberately writing this scene in order to promote his agenda. But really, my entire point for describing this dumpster fire of a comic is the fact that when I got to the end of it and I felt disgusted by reading this thing, I also felt the same way as I felt about Batwoman. It's like, really, they've destroyed the character of Wolverine, which I have loved for years, so much now that I simply don't care. Again, it's a feeling of hatred and disgust, not in the way that you would normally think about feeling. It's a willing aversion to this, as if, why in the world do I care anymore to even be close to this thing? And my point for all of this is that in these progressive comics, where you have these progressive creators, they are focusing on their ideology. They have destroyed the idea of hero, and they're focusing on the power of these individuals in order to promote their ideological ends. So the story itself comes far down on the chain of things that they care about. Right at the top is their ideology. And as such, it's not actually a story, it's propaganda. That's what it is. It's a form of propaganda because it's trying to teach you something in a way that gets around your rational mind. Again, if you look at the traditional Western way that a story is set up and has been for well over 2,000, almost 3,000 years now, a story is a representation of reality. And what they're doing, they're not representing reality, they're twisting reality in order to promote their agenda. That's what comes first, so it's not really a story. It's a political pamphlet, not an actual story. And one of the things that this made me think about was the fact that I don't care about these books or these characters anymore, because really, the people writing these books and these characters, they don't care either. If they're just using these characters for a different ends, they don't really care about these stories and these characters. Which again brought to mind a very short conversation that I had with Richard Meyer. We were both covering this same book. I think it was the last Thor book that Jason Aaron did. And at the end of that book, there was a little page where he described his run on Thor and how he describes when he used to read comics, there was a magic to them. But when he started to make comics, the magic simply got lost. And he thought that that was the way it actually works for everyone. If you start to see behind the screen and look at how these things are created, you lose the magic. And I pointed that out to Richard, and he said, "That's ridiculous. I make comics for a living right now, and every day it seems like magic because I get to see behind how these things are created." And when Richard said that, in theory, I completely agreed with him. That was in theory. Today, I would agree with him in practice as well. Because right now, I am writing my own graphic novel. Actually, I have it written. I'm just writing out scenes now and working with my artists to try to get them down on a page. And I gotta say, I love my characters. I love writing my characters. I love writing these stories and the backstory for this book. And I didn't think it could get any more miraculous than that until I got to work with my artist, who is Renzo Rodriguez, and that just put it on a different level. That made it so much better. It is amazing to create in this way. And just quickly, some of you may recognize Renzo's name. Why? Because he's worked on comics for Xenoscope, for Black Mask, for Action Lab Comics, but also he just finished up doing Pandemic with Richard Meyer, and as soon as he finished that book, he jumped straight onto mine. He is a beautiful artist. I suggest you go check him out. Go find him on Twitter. Go follow him. He is amazing. And like I said, that certainly includes his art, because when I gave him this story that I love so much about heroes, and he took it and he put his own spin on it to put it down on a page, something indeed miraculous did happen. That's how I feel about creating this book. Now, very briefly, I'm going to go on to a bit of an aside here to describe for you what my book is about, because a lot of people say to me, when you talk about your book, will you please tell us what it's about? So, very briefly, this is mostly backstory for my book. The working title is Thomas Valiant, because this is my main superhero. His name is Valiant. And he has basically the power set of Mr. Fantastic, but he's been trained as a soldier and a spy, and he uses it mostly for disguise and deception. And he lives in a world which is very much like the amalgam world from the 1990s, where you have both Marvel and DC existing in one world. And he lives in a city where it's divided by a river. One side of this river is a, let's say, teeming metropolis where you have all of your DC characters, and the other half of this city is New York where you have all of your Marvel characters. And these characters exist as they exist now within comics. They're not actually heroes. They're super-powered beings, but they don't cling to any kind of heroism at all. Your DC characters basically think of themselves as gods and have great hubris. And by the way, I'm taking a little bit of how the creators for each of these companies work within their progressive field and laying it over top of how they present these characters and presenting them in that way within my story. So you have these DC characters. Again, they have this great hubris. Whereas you have this Marvel side where these Marvel type characters, they think of themselves basically as celebrities. And hero gets lost in all of this for both sides. And you have my character, Thomas Valiant, and he just wants to be a hero. He tries to be a hero according to what these sides want, and he realizes that they're just not heroes, not in a way that a hero should be. And so he starts his own team. But his team, focusing on heroism, really just ticks off both the sides of the other superpowered beings, because it points out the fact that they're not acting in a heroic way. And so they want to destroy his team. And what we have within my book itself is their first mission. Now, he puts together what he thinks is a stealth team, and they want to do stealth missions to be heroes and help people, but this goes south really quickly. And he starts to get pummeled on by both sides, because, as I said, they want him destroyed. Because his acts of heroism point to the fact that they're no longer heroic. And the book itself is basically him and his team going through the gauntlet from both sides, trying to survive because they wish to be heroes. The very short version of how I usually describe it is that it is 2 parts 1980s X-Men, 1 part 1980s Justice League, and 1 part Ocean's 11. And I mean both Ocean's 11, both the new one and the 1960s one that had Frank Sinatra in it. So that's just a little description of my book. And hopefully I will have it up on Indiegogo by the end of the summer, maybe early fall. Because as I said, I'm working with Renzo right now. We've just got into the first 10 pages of layout, and we're still doing the visual concept for a lot of characters. So all that out of the way, I want to go back to talking about, yes, creating a comic it does feel miraculous. Getting deeper into these stories and these characters and creating them, far be it from being something that strips the magic from what you're doing and what you're seeing and what you're part of. No, it just deepens it. And that brings me to my point of the future of comics. Because something else happened over the last couple of weeks, which really made me think about this. And it was Garth Ennis being canceled. Because Garth Ennis, one of the, I guess you could call him, senior statesmen of comics over the last 20 years, he basically got canceled for something that no one would see as a crime except for progressives. But the funny thing was that a lot of the people who are now the progressive gatekeepers of comics and make sure only their voice gets into comics, they all got into comics because of Garth Ennis, through his message board. And they all scrambled in order to make sure that they themselves weren't canceled because they had this connection to Garth Ennis. It was actually quite funny to see. But that whole thing made me think, is there such a thing as the Garth Ennis message board today? That is to say, where all of these people are getting together who are the future of comics. And it didn't take me very long to realize that that was a stupid question on my part. Why? Because I'm on that platform right now, and so are you. And no, I'm not talking about YouTube. I'm talking about this customer revolt where we want to take back comics and make them about stories, not about propaganda. Now, some people might see this customer movement as being centered around crowd-funded comics. Some people may see it as being centered around the hashtag of Comicsgate. Some people even see it as being centered around the Diversity in Comics or Comics Matter channel. But really, I don't think it matters what you center it around. We're all doing the same thing. We're all trying to take back comics and build something new. And we're interacting with each other and creating at the same time. And this is where the future of comics lies. Because personally, I can attest to this. Just for myself, making videos about heroes, I have made a whole bunch of contacts with people that I would never have otherwise. And they are people of all different kinds. You know, I brush up against people like Doug Ernst, who actually helped me a little bit when I was trying to start my channel. Or like Raging Golden Eagle, who likes to comment on some of my videos. These are people who are now making comics. There are others like Eve Kaninen, who I have to give a massive thank you to, because I think she has brought me more subscribers than anyone else. There are creative people like Renzo Rodriguez, who I now am working with. Like Charlie Snogans, and Charlie, I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce your last name right, I really don't run into this name very much, who is working right now with Clint or Sweetcast on their own book, and other artists like Nick Axe, who I just learned about over the last few weeks because of contact through my channel. All of these people, by the way, you should go follow all of these people. These are great people who are the future of comics. And I'm sure if I wasn't working off the top of my head, I could add many more names to this list. However, overshadowing all of those people, and certainly myself, and even Richard, is the fact that this is a customer movement. And it's you who are listening, you who are participating, you who are commenting, you who are buying. You are the main reason why all of this exists. Because really, the progressive comic industry has given up on anything to do with the customer at all. Like I said, they're promoting propaganda. It's simply their ideology which comes first. And if the respect for their characters is something that's way down the list, any respect for the customer isn't even on the list. They have zero connection with their customers. And they want zero connection with their customers. That's why they block customers en masse and actually promote other people to do so. They want nothing to do with you or I as a customer. So the customers don't simply go away like they think they will. No, we go somewhere else. And this is where we have gone. We have gone to a place where we can create or enjoy actual comics with an actual story, not something that's focused and bent around an ideological statement. And one of the massive benefits, by the way, of this connection with an audience is that myself included and other people who are making comics, we get to have an interaction with you wherein you can tell us what is wrong. That is massively important. Why? Because, well, we're just starting out, and we don't have editors like traditional editors would be there for comics. So who becomes the editor? Well, you do. The people who read this material and then give feedback, you become the editors of this material. You become an integral part of what is going to be created in the future. And like I said, far be it from trying to ignore this criticism. We want this criticism. I remember back at the first of my channel when I told Richard that I'm going to roast Iron Sights, even though it's not even out yet. You've just put a bunch of pages up online. I'm going to roast it. And he said, go ahead, please do that. Because why? He wanted someone to make his book better. He wanted someone outside of himself to point out the faults in what he was creating so he could make it better. He wanted customer feedback. And that's exactly what I'm hoping to get as well. Although I know from working with editors before, it's a little bit of a bitter pill to swallow when people tell you that, no, this really isn't good enough. But you have to accept that because you're the customers, and that's what it's about. And that's part of what makes it miraculous. That's part of the magic that Jason Aaron just doesn't get. And I would say not just him, but all of the people who are working for mainstream comics right now. They just don't get it. Because, of course, they're focused on their progressive ideology. And see, that's exactly the point. The point of their progressive ideology is destruction. It's not creation. All they want to do is destroy. So I can see why they're not happy in what they are so-called creating, because it's not really a creative process at all. It's a process of tearing something down which others have created. Whereas true creation of something real has this miraculous quality to it. You feel it when you participate in the creation of it. And certainly you want to bring out that feeling within the people who are reading this book, that is to say your customers, your audience. And it just boils down to the fact that if you're creating something like a comic and you don't feel this magic, you don't feel this miraculous quality, well, you just ain't doing it right. So, I don't know if I've given you anything new to think about today. That was a ramble that turned into a rant. But if I did, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. All right, I'll see you later. Bye.